Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I welcome you all. We are very glad you are here for our webinar on the topic of navigating workplace AI in 2025. My name is Sashma Best. I am a support officer for ASCI. This webinar will focus on a few points like quick start guide, key AI terms, topics, opportunities and risks, building an AI safety net in the workplace, engaging existing tools for daily tasks. Our expert speaker, Andrew Wilson, is here to help you understand it well. Andrew Wilson is a director of leading AI training organization Rail Initiative. Over the last 20 years, he has worked in and around technology from websites to apps for governments to startups and everyone in between. He is passionate about providing the training needed to ensure human flourishing in an AI-enabled world. This is an opportunity to learn from the session. Please ask questions and share your own experiences. Before we begin, let's review a few house rules to ensure everyone has a positive and productive experience. If you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window. Also, please be aware that this webinar will be recorded and it will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel after the webinar. We really appreciate your cooperation and hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Now I will hand it over to Andrew to start. Thank you so much, Andrew, for giving your time today. Over to you now.
Thank you, Sushma, and thank you to ASCI for inviting me today. I hope everybody enjoys this presentation. You're welcome to put your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll have time to answer those at the end. So as Sushma said, I'm a director of Rail Initiative, and today we're going to focus on navigating workplace AI in 2025 from the experimentation phase through to the transformation phase, where it really changes how we work in the day-to-day. First up, it's worth noting to avoid any confusion in this group, which I know will include some or many logistics people, that we have nothing to do with trains. So RAIL stands for the Responsible Use of AI License. And our vision is to ensure that more people are able to safely participate in the AI revolution. And we do that through an industry recognized training program addressing the fundamentals of AI and its safe and appropriate use in the workplace. After all, the world has changed over the last few years significantly. And as we said in a recent campaign, the chat is out of the bag. So we are not going back to a pre-generative AI world. So whatever guidelines and workplace rules, et cetera, may come into place, the urgent task is to learn how to navigate and capitalize on AI in the workplace, in particular generative AI, because it's so accessible to everyone. There's a joke that I find myself telling frequently these days. Starts with there's two guys falling asleep in their tent in the forest, and they hear this rustling outside, and a bear starts trying to claw at the tent. And one guy sits up and starts strapping on his running shoes, and the other guy says, "What are you doing, mate? You can't outrun a bear." And he says, "I know, but I just have to outrun you." And that is essentially one of the concerns for people in the modern workplace environment is whether or not AI is a threat to their jobs. And our view is that the more people have the fundamental training and the skills to engage with AI appropriately and effectively in the workplace, the more resilient they will be, and the more resilient a workforce we will have as a result. This joke is made a little meta by using an AI-generated image. So thank you to Google's image and model for this one, which cutely considered that the men would be wearing matching pajamas, interestingly enough. We've found in our discussions with clients across a range of workplaces, from governments to corporates, that there are often two extremes when it comes to workplace AI use. The first is Dennis, the untrained cowboy who uses AI recklessly and creates risk. So he pastes AI hallucinations into company documents, generates web copy claiming ISO accreditation when the company doesn't have it. That's a real example that I saw recently, by the way, and thinks that generative AI can do anything and everything with little effort. Right? Debbie, on the other hand, is the resistant traditionalist who avoids AI entirely. Right? She misses the opportunities and competitive advantages and is putting herself at risk through her interaction. You can probably read on the screen, but Dennis is saying, "What? I just threw it into Chat GPT." And Debbie's saying, "Oh, no, not me. I take all of my meeting notes by hand." So today we're going to discuss how to find that responsible middle ground and how to avoid being either a Dennis or a Debbie, with my apologies to anybody out there by the name of Dennis or Debbie. So let's look at a quick timeline here. So it was late 2022 when ChatGPT hit the mainstream, went from 0 to 1 million users faster than any other app or website platform in history, right? A matter of days. And that was really the first breakthrough of everybody starting to talk about AI in the mainstream. It went from something research, developers, scientists, and so on, who might be working on bespoke AI cases such as computer vision for self-driving cars, etc., through to your average person being able to suddenly engage with very, very powerful tools, delivering amazing results. So 2022, very late 2022 was when it happened, and 2023, as the models evolved, was where that real breakthrough started to happen, with ChatGPT leading the charge of generative AI going into the mainstream. And then what we saw last year was mass experimentation. So large numbers of people, both personally and professionally, starting to engage with tools like ChatGPT. And many organizations starting to engage with AI in some form or another, formally or informally, and to see many software platforms engaging services like ChatGPT to deliver AI functionality on top of their existing tech stack. So what we've found so far with 2025 is we believe it will be the year of mass adoption. Okay, so that goes from we're experimenting, we're tinkering with it here and there, but 2025 is the year where workplaces are really focusing on how do we bed this in, how do we use it. Moves beyond just a toy or a hey, look what I can do. Everybody's tied themselves with writing humorous poems about their cat and so on, to really engaging with it at a deeper level, and not just they call a zero shot, like a single prompt and return thing, but using it for high level work that's not just leveraging Gen AI for simple content generation tasks. And so when we look at AI adoption by the numbers, a recent survey from January 2025 this year, 65% of Australian workers say they're using AI. But I'm going to suggest that there's a significant sample bias in that figure. There's that's 5% above international standards as well. So Australians typically are regarded as very early adopters of technology. We led the charge in terms of mobile phone, smartphone penetration in the country, and we often do the same with apps and technology. So whilst it's inarguable, it is a significant number, and it's growing. Much of that number, though, is represented by what is called shadow AI. So many workplaces are still struggling with formalizing adoption or policies. And so they have this, we don't want to say not to use it, but we don't want to endorse it officially yet. And we know we need to do something, but we don't know exactly what that is. And in several large corporates we've spoken to, and I'm in this particular case, two of the largest corporates in Australia, they've launched their own proprietary AI models. So they've decided what it is that they need to do, how they'll go about it, and they built proprietary AI models off the back of existing LLMs. The problem they have is that internally, when we've discussed with people, there's very, very little utilization of them, and many are simply using ChatGPT. And so this concept of shadow AI or BYO AI reflects the same sort of challenges that we saw with BYOD, or bring your own device, where IT and cybersecurity departments in many large organizations were confronted with the issue of people wanting to have a single phone, not a work phone, and a private phone to carry, and a single phone that was under their control, had no oversight and security protocols initially that were able to be implemented by those organizations. And so many of them are finding that the challenge of shadow AI or BYO AI is very significant, because they have little oversight and little understanding of what's been done, and it's very difficult to police. After all, everybody can simply pick up their phone and access ChatGPT or Claude or Meta AI or whatever it is that is their tool of choice. Excuse me. So returning to the lack of engagement with some of those tools internally, it shouldn't surprise you with the background of our organization that we see this largely as a training issue, which is why we're talking to these organizations. Even Microsoft is reeling from this same problem. For those of you who have been following the news, and there's a large amount of AI news out there on the daily in terms of practices in business, adoption, launches, new products, and so on. But in large-scale trials of Microsoft Copilot with the ATO and several major corporates, across several studies, 2/3 of people reported that it was, quote, underwhelming, and then went on to question its utility in their workplace. A Copilot is very, very powerful and has many attributes which make it particularly useful for corporates. It's connected to Microsoft Knowledge Graph and therefore able to connect various parts of information across the organization and surface useful results. The problem that we've seen in discussion with many people is that AI, and in particular generative AI, and I'll get to, I'm using some terminology here which may not be familiar to some of you, but we'll get to that shortly. Generative AI in particular is often treated like a mystery box, so that it can give you anything with no skills required, give you the answers at the first basic prompt with complete accuracy, live updated data, and so on. And of course, that disappoints. And one of those things is just a foundational understanding of things like training cutoff dates. And this sort of parallels a conversation I had with my 6-year-old this morning, where he was looking at Google Maps for the first time and saying, oh, I can see our neighbor's place and I'm going to see if I can see them. And I was saying, this is a snapshot in time and it's not going to reflect what we see today. And so whilst some models like ChatGPT have live access to the web and can provide more updated results, their base training data still influences the results. And so some of these concepts are not well understood, and that's the type of foundational knowledge that makes generative AI more useful, because people are then empowered with the knowledge to determine which tool is appropriate to use, what to look out for, and so on. So the aim of today is that we pry open the mystery box a little and learn some of these fundamentals, starting with some key terms. So, excuse me. First up, artificial intelligence. This isn't just about ChatGPT, right? It often takes all the headlines, but it's systems designed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, and that covers a wide range of things. It's defined as distinct from, say, machine learning by two characteristics being adaptivity and autonomy. So the machine can make choices without human input and then adapts to information that it's given. And you can see the famous example of the Turing test is whether or not a person is able to understand whether they're engaging with a machine. And you can see how ChatGPT in many cases would be able to pass that Turing test depending on their environments. So artificial intelligence, it also includes things like computer vision. So human intelligence used to determine what is one object versus another object and pick up anomalies in a manufacturing process, or detect errors or things that it shouldn't have fallen into the production line, pick them off a conveyor belt, for instance. These are other areas where AI is being engaged beyond just the generative AI. Excuse me. Another key concept is machine learning, which is a subset of AI. So the systems learn from data to improve their understanding without explicit programming. So an example of that would be, I was working on a savings app previously, and it would send saving prompts to people. And we had a machine learning algorithm which would learn, based at an individual user level, what was the most effective time of day to send that user a sales prompt. So that type of collecting the data, but making different decisions without being explicitly programmed at each step to do that. So essentially learning from data, identifying patterns, and making decisions or predictions based on that. So that learning process occurs without being explicitly programmed for each specific task. So it allows the system to improve its performance over time through experience in data analysis and testing. Excuse me. LLMs, or large language models. I referred to LLMs before, and these are AI systems that are trained around vast amounts of text data so that they can understand and generate human-like language. That's essentially the technology behind ChatGPT, Claude, etc. The typical generative AI models, text-based inputs, text-based outputs, and its ability to understand is based on mapping of adjacent words and so on in a similar way to the way the human brain functions. So in physical design, there's a concept known as biomimicry, where, for instance, if they're trying to make silent fans, then they look at the feathers on an owl to try and replicate the way an owl can fly silently to attack its prey. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, a lot of it is built around understanding how human intelligence works and building neural networks that function in the same way as a brain does, connecting the different parts of information. Excuse me. Then generative AI. So an AI system that can create new content, not just text. So obviously generative AI is famously known for producing text, but many of those models and others that are based on image only are capable of generating images or code. And so then we come to prompt engineering, which is the skill of giving instructions to those models and AI tools, whether it's for data analysis or for creating content or generating images, so on, to make that particularly useful. There's an art to a skill in that. Excuse me, an art and a skill in that. So whilst I've highlighted that generative AI is what many people think of when we say AI today, it really is one subset of that. However, given it's such an important part and it's generally speaking, the most accessible part, it's where we'll focus much of our time today because it's more directly applicable. Before we get to skills, though, that's the introductory level things covered. So moving on to the main game, one of the first things that we discuss in terms of responsible AI use in the workplace is the essential safeguards. And so I'll give you an overview here. You may be working in organizations that have clearly defined policies. You may be working in an organization that has no policies at all. And depending on which environment you're in and how familiar you are with any policies that exist, you may be aware of some of this information. But some of the key things to consider, excuse me, and the one that most people typically think of first up is data security. So questions like, does the model train on your data? Are you giving access to data that you should not be? So when sharing information with external AI platforms, you need to be aware of which systems do and do not train on your data. So as a very general rule, if you're not paying for the product, it's possible you are the product. So in return for free products, you're supplying data which is used to train their models or could be used for other purposes entirely. There are also settings on the major tools typically that you can change in this regard too. So organizations like OpenAI, which is the parent company to ChatGPT, Anthropic, which owns Claude, Google, Gemini, which owns Gemini, and excuse me, Microsoft with Copilot realized that organizations, the market was for business use of AI primarily, and that organizations wouldn't engage with the tools if they were training on the data because people were not keen to simply supply company information to train others and essentially help their competitors. So most of those have controls in there, even in their free products. So for instance, in the free version of ChatGPT, you can turn off the option to train the model. Excuse One of the things to consider, though, is there's a risk of supplying data to any third party, right? So if that data is stored in some form or there's a human review process, then it's not without risk. So your organization may have direct guidelines on that. But another one to highlight is the risk of aggregators, and particularly when we talk about the idea of shadow AI or BYO AI, is that there are many aggregators that are like platforms popping up that will give you access to each of the major platforms like Claude, ChatGPT, and so on under a single subscription. So you pay $20 a month to them, and instead of paying $50 a month to ChatGPT and Claude and so on, then they promise to generate the best of them all in the one place. But many of these are sort of garage startup type models where you have no understanding of their data handling practices. Some of them may even have been set up with nefarious intent. So even if you trust, say, OpenAI above ChatGPT and Anthropic with Claude, if you're using an intermediary, then it's like handing a package to a delinquent kid to put in the mailbox because you trust Australia Post. There's a very significant risk of intermediaries that's often not recognised by individuals engaging with them. Excuse me. Then we move on to IP and confidentiality. So are there policies or regulations that prevent you from supplying data to these models? So even if it doesn't train on your data, even if it's entirely secure, you may be prohibited from supplying it due to existing data protection policies. So for instance, your doctor can't simply upload your health files to train a custom GPT without your consent, right? So that may be useful for you, and there may be very low risk if you trust in the cybersecurity practices of one of the major technology firms on the planet now, being OpenAI. However, there may still be guidelines that prevent you from supplying that information that you need to be aware of. The next thing is human oversight. So the machine is never responsible for errors or problems, the human is. That's a fundamental rule, and potentially the most significant example of that is with weapons. So we are at a stage where, at least not publicly, nation states engaging autonomous weapons. So there's still a human, excuse me, that must make a decision to pull the trigger because a human must be held accountable. And that's one of the challenges of driverless cars, is how do you hold a machine accountable? If the machine is making a choice, as a human may have made a choice, as which other pedestrian or vehicle to avoid or hit, that's very difficult. A human is making that choice, and they'll make it in the spur of the moment, whatever the consequences and inputs to that may be. But that human can be held accountable. Whereas you cannot hold a machine accountable. You can only hold the humans who program the machine or provided the inputs to the machine accountable. So human oversight of whatever is going on with AI is enormously important. That comes down to the most basic reviews of documents to more significant activities. There was a famous example recently where a Disney employee downloaded an AI agent with a view to, excuse me, assisting with some daily tasks, and it ran amok in Disney's system and released personal details at an enormous scale because it was obviously a piece of malware. Right? So when we think of risks here, the benefits of AI are significant, and we will get to those, but the risks need to be considered, and human oversight is important. The next thing is setting boundaries. So this is just a practical, almost part of the social contract in the workplace. I often say jokingly, if you personally send me an AI-generated email, I'll generate an AI reply, and then the bots can go back and forth like a game of Pong. Right. So, but for building an AI, those are for personal emails. And I'm aware of somebody who was terminated recently, and it was a very clearly generated response, a generated notice, absent of any of the human input that would normally be associated with those things, because it was a very poorly guided response. Excuse me. But for something like building an e-newsletter, AI is quite likely a very, very good starting point. And so there will be different boundaries set based on the context, the activity, the workplace, the individuals involved. But even if these aren't provided in your workplace yet, and I think most organizations are still feeling their way through this process, much like they were with social media in the workplace and so on, I would just encourage you to consider them personally. Like, is publishing colleagues with unedited AI drafts of things appropriate and beneficial? Is Is it useful as part of your process? Because when the costs to generate are low, but the human review costs are high, you need to consider where the efficiency mix is in that process. And so that will be part of an ongoing discussion. But again, I would suggest that responsible AI use involves consideration of personal responsibility in these things. So then we'll look at a practical 4-part framework for introducing AI or engaging with your own AI use in the workplace. Excuse me. The first one will be understanding your tools rules. So is what you are using training on any of your inputs? So do you need to turn the settings off? What are the settings? Is there a human review of your any of the data that's supplied? How are you managing compliance with rules like GDPR, etc. if you're dealing internationally and similar legislation around the world? The next thing would be using a traffic light system for data. So green is things that are safe to share, so publicly available, not sensitive, doesn't contain any confidential information or personal details, so generally a low risk. Amber will be things that require caution, so may or may not be suitable for use with AI tools, and you may need to take steps like mitigation steps such as redacting certain data. One of the things people will typically do, especially in the informal AI use where they're using on the side unofficially, is to put in the name of a hypothetical organization and provide hypothetical scenarios that they can then map back manually to their own. But excuse me, Amber includes data that, if exposed through logging, which is the recorded prompts sitting on the servers of the Gen AI companies, etc., or security vulnerabilities if there's a hack, or because they've got a human review team that's occasionally passing through the data, could have limited negative consequences, but still warrants caution. Then red is obviously you simply don't share it. So those are things that would be, banking information, dates of birth, biometric data, etc., of individuals and customers, credit card numbers, payroll information, and so on. And then there's different rules around the world, but things like GDPR or HIPAA, which is the Health Data America, and in Australia we refer to PII, personally identifiable information. We need to be very, very cautious with that. Then there's verification protocols for outputs. So what process do you go through to verify outputs for official work? And do you need to document what you've done, like that it was generated by AI, and what tool was used, etc. Some workplaces require that, many don't. But a verification process of sorts is part of that. The human is responsible. Right? And of course, for any of this, you will be hugely unsurprised to hear me say that training, a robust, well-structured process with defining learning outcomes and assessments designed for the workplace is a must. It's very difficult to give people guidelines around how to engage with something if they don't understand the basics of what they're engaging with. And also, if you put onerous restrictions on, without training, then they will often find that it becomes in the too hard basket and you miss out on those efficiencies. So balancing risk mitigation with skills development to make that more efficient. Now let's get to the more hands-on parts. I'll run you through a demonstration on one of my preferred AI tools at the moment. This may be new to some or to all of you, depending on your exposure to and experience with generative AI already. But we'll try and make it practical. If you're familiar with using ChatGPT, then I would like to introduce you to its superior, which is not an official view, of course. That's just my personal preference. And that is Claude. So I found many people aren't aware of Claude. It's taken significant market share in workplace AI use from ChatGPT over the last 6 months in particular. Some quick background, it's from an organization called Anthropic. So it's formed from some OpenAI dissidents who left OpenAI, where they were working on ChatGPT, to develop a more responsible AI. But the principles that I'm about to teach you here are applicable to most generative AI tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Meta AI, and so on. So Claude, despite being based on a large language model, has the ability to do computer vision, so vision analysis, upload documents beyond just OCR to interpret what's shown visually in a document, to generate code, to process in multiple languages, and so on. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment here while I skip over and share a Claude screen with you. Okay, so you should now be able to see my Claude screen. So again, this is some really fun foundational stuff, but if you've not visited a generative AI model like ChatGPT or Claude before, the interface is typically designed much like Google to be straight to the point of a single call to action as a focus, which is a chat window where you can provide your prompts. And so this is just using it on the same basis that if you had a free account under most of the LLM chatbot models, you're able to go in and create prompts like this. So, for instance, what I will start with is I'm going to upload a file here. And again, this is publicly one sec. So what I've done is I've chosen a publicly available annual report from a national sporting organisation for no particular reason. So this report is some 80 pages in length. It's going to take a moment to upload, and it's going to read that as we go. So it's the annual report. I'll start with a very basic prompt. Executive briefing. CEO for the CEO of my company who is looking to engage with this organization as a potential commercial sponsor. This is okay. What I will do is I will set up a project for this purpose. Sorry. So let's call this Diving Australia commercial engagement. And we can provide I'm not going to describe the details of what this is. Here, I won't do it in details, it will take too long, but you will help me formulate strategies and communications to assist with partnership development. That's only a reference for how we engage with that. for us to see as our own reference, that's not training information. So here's what we can do is add project knowledge, which is to upload which will take a moment to do. I'm uploading the 80-page file at the moment. That's 10% of the knowledge capacity. So there's 1,863 lines of text. That's only 10% of the knowledge capacity. So I can provide a huge amount of information. And what I'm doing here is training my own mini AI agent to act specifically anytime I want to talk about a Diving Australia commercial engagement. And in this case, I can set the project instructions to say, you are my strategic consultant. You should request additional information from me before proceeding to develop your responses. Provide brief responses first, and then extrapolate once you have typing on the fly was good, have the necessary information from me. Answer using UK English and use artifacts for longer information, and I'll explain what that is. So now I will say, provide an executive briefing for my CEO who is looking to engage in a commercial sponsorship with Diving Australia. And I'll refine this over time. I'm also mindful of time, so I will I'll make this relatively quick. So you can see, rather than just generating something which could be generic, it's asked me to improve for additional information, to improve the information that it has so it can do a better job. It's also taken into account all the text that was uploaded, all 1,863 lines of text across 80 pages. What industry or sector does your company operate in? I deliberately left that out because I knew that would ask the question, because an executive briefing would make sense here. So I'm going to say it's diving. So let's say, one, we produce swimwear and beach pool towels. And I can go through and answer each of these. Answer based on that information only. So I could have gone through each of those questions and refined it further, but you'll note the ability here is that what I've done is, in a very short space of time, trained my own custom AI agent, so that any time that I want to engage in something in a conversation with this, it's not relying on finding the last chat alone, but having the same baseline of information to work with, in this case, an annual report, because it's a good repository of information. But you'll note there that I'm only taking up 10% of that information. So I could have provided 180,000 lines of text for it to consider before it generates its responses. And you can provide guidance on that. So one of the problems you see is there's US English in a lot of Australian documents. That's an immediate tell that they're generated by ChatGPT. So what it's done here is it's generated what's called an artifact. It becomes a shareable asset. And each of this information is not drawing from generalized training data, but specifically the information that I've given it. So the figures are drawn, and the results, etc., are drawn from the annual report. So by training specifically on information, having it in one place, I can create a chat on the sponsorship part. Then I can create a separate chat within that project, drawing on the same information that helps me build social content as we promote the sponsorship and commercial arrangement. Then I can create another one, which is an internal team briefing and so on. And that's just one example using a paid subscription model that allows you to provide custom training to an AI agent that you can similarly do across ChatGPT and other platforms. I won't go through each of these now, but you can expect, if you've engaged with AI before, that you get quite thorough responses. And if you were to look through this, it may not be the final executive briefing you provide, but it's just done what could have been the human consumption time for an 80-page report, the consideration for how to structure the executive briefing, and then to develop the relevant parts in the executive briefing. We've just done in the space of about 4 minutes, what would have taken 4 hours or more previously. And again, that's not to say that I provided all the perfect inputs, because I would typically take longer, answer all 7 questions, upload more information, and get an even better result. And what that means is I'm not just dumping things in randomly and saying, can you polish this paragraph for me, or idea generation, but it's trained data with very detailed prompts so that I'm driving the machine and delivering better outcomes. So now, jumping back over to this, I thought I'll provide you a brief introduction to Rails certification, and having had a conversation with the ASCI team earlier, stand by for an email, because the full Rail training will be available to members at a significant discount. So if you've been warmed by today's introduction and you want to go deeper, or you see the need for training your team, or even sponsoring the training into your organization more broadly, then this will provide you with a view of what Rails certification involves. But in short, it's an industry recognized global certification for executives and teams. Excuse me, we have 4 core modules and 2 electives to achieve Rails certification, with each of those modules being approximately an hour between. So each module contains 3 topics. Each topic video is around about the 10-minute mark, with supporting text and practical exercises, so linking to platforms for practicing with your prompt engineering and so on. And we deliver that both online and offline. I'm just check. Just going to make sure that I have this right screen share before I proceed with this further. And so within Rails, I said we have 4 core modules. So an introduction to AI, AI in the workplace, ethics, security and privacy, and prompt engineering. We have a range of elective modules based on both roles and industries, which is growing week by week. So AI for sales, marketing, teaching, office administration. And then we have elective modules based on your platform of choice, either what you're using privately or what your workplace is using. And AI for high school students and public servants. And as I said, there's more being added over time. But if we jump into prompt engineering, and if you want a more detailed view of what I did a quick run through with on Claude, this would be the module to find a lot of that information. So our videos.
Welcome back, everyone. Reminder that I'm Ed, your AI generated guide. In our last session,
So each of these are video driven, which is people's preferred learning method these days, with supporting text content, so that you can see the prompts in more detail, for instance, and see the outputs and responses with links to the platforms to go and try. And we use an AI generated avatar on the basis that it allows us to recut our content every 90 days as platforms and technology changes. So if anybody is interested in exploring Rails certification in full for yourself or your team, then Peter and the team will make that information available to you. At this point, and I apologize for my coughing partway through, but I will throw to questions. If anybody has any questions, then you're welcome to drop them in the chat now. So I'm also open to questions about what, we won't disclose any proprietary information, but if anyone has any questions about what we've seen in terms of adoption with others, conversations we've had with others about how they're using it in the workplace, I'm happy to entertain questions on any of those fronts.
There is one question, Andrew. You are on mute. Andrew, you are on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Hi, Indrajit. Yes, so sorry, I was looking in the webinar chat rather than the Q&A. I'm not a native Zoom user. Cost of the training, rail license certification is $499, but there will be discounts available to ASCI members. So you'll receive details of those in coming days. That's for an individual user license, but it scales down to $249 for larger teams across at an enterprise level. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Please write your questions using Q&A box. One more question from Indrajit. Andrew?
So what are the risks of not taking up AI in organizations? I would argue that there are very, very few organizations that will not be able to take up AI. And in fact, it'll be embedded into most software in some form, regardless, in the same way that many other technologies have become part of everyday software use. So if you're looking at Netflix, then it's part of your recommendation algorithm of what to watch next and so on. But in terms of looking at AI adoption of generative AI or a deeper level of AI across the workforce, I would argue that the risks are similar to what I outlined to individuals with the bear analogy before. And that is, if you are taking 4, 5, 6, 7 times longer to do what your competitors are able to do, then you will not be competitive for very long. So there's a significant shift coming in the management consulting space, which was highlighted with a look at KPMG in the UK recently, where they were 30% down on their hiring of new grads, and partner bonuses went up by something like 40%. And what that represented was a shift from the work that was normally done by the grunts, so to speak, bringing in fresh grads on relatively low salaries to cut their teeth in the organization, hopefully work up. That was just farmed out to AI. And so there was the partners were able to capitalize on that in terms of profits at the moment. But what will happen over time is that will shuffle down to when all the competitors are using it, and it's not 6 hours of work anymore, it's an hour's work with some intelligent use of AI that will set a benchmark pricing for it. And you will not remain competitive if you want to sell 6 hours of service for something that could be done in 1 hour. The same goes, there's a point at which you hire an excavator to dig a hole rather than pay a guy to work for 7 weeks to do it by hand. We'll find a similar shift with AI. So that to me would be the risks if it's not taken up, is a fundamental loss of competitiveness. Thank you for a follow-up question. What guidance do we provide when one's exploring and adopting suitable tools or models? There are many providers. Yeah, so one of the first things that I would suggest as a baseline is exploring any of the majors, which would be Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, and Claude, because they are backed by organizations that have significant cybersecurity practices in place, and versus some of these intermediators and other generative AI. So I'm talking the chatbot style LLM models. There are others out there, and some of those are very good. But I would suggest starting with one of those, start with a free plan and experiment and see what you can achieve using either turn the settings off for training and just, excuse me, run hypotheticals as I did. I have no interest in sponsoring Diving Australia as far as, I don't run a beach towel company or something. But you can see how you might use it by running dummy examples with fictitious data. And then if you can make a business case for doing that and you need permission to adopt it formally, then I would run that up the line with an example. And examples are powerful ways of doing that. So Chris, where does the use of applications like Claude sit in this field and use? So Claude, excuse me, has the ability to be integrated in with API calls to other things. So for instance, in Google Sheets or into websites to be able to access and pass through certain data and analyze it and provide generative responses and things on the fly. But where things like Claude are is most people will start with having it as a web browser with an account set up in that, whether it's free or paid, and basically the options are with ChatGPT and Claude. They are distinct from your general tool suite, which like Docs or Google Docs or Microsoft Word, which it means there's a degree of cutting and pasting involved there. Whereas if you engage with something like Gemini, which is Google's AI model, then it's integrated into Google Docs and Slides, Google Mail, etc. So if you're a Google Workspace environment, that may make sense. And if you are a Microsoft environment, then Copilot might make sense. But we also see people breaking that model. So they're Microsoft environment, but they prefer working with Claude. And so they're doing that via a browser. Excuse me. Peter, yes, thank you for pointing out we've been in discussion with ASCI and are about to launch Rail as part of the CPD portfolio. So those details will be included on the release to webinar participants too. Philip, as most users are familiar with Windows, quite a number of people are gravitating towards Copilot as their AI of choice. Any particular comments on Copilot and the locking down of Copilot? So yeah, one would expect Copilot to achieve a level of dominance in the corporate and government sector based on existing Microsoft relationships there. And that's what they've leveraged very well. Copilot has some excellent capabilities, including the ability to, I mentioned about integration with Microsoft Knowledge Graph. So it's able to access, once given approval to do so, it's able to access information across the organization. So you're able to query and say, what did this person do over the last 3 months? Give me a summary of their workplace activities and contributions, and it will analyze the files that they have touched and what's been done and give you a short summary form of that. That's not something that you can currently get out of any of the other models. And so there's definitely utility with it. Its ability to lock down on company data it's not the only one that does it, but because of the Microsoft suite of products and the depth of integration and access to the amount of company data, it does that better than any of the others. I have a personal preference when it comes to day-to-day generative AI tasks to leverage Claude, which is why I used it for that example. But Microsoft, I think the poor assessments of it to date have been due to a lack of training, not because the product lacks the ability to perform. Interject, any efforts by Rail to create AI for supply chain or related topics? That, as you can imagine, is something that we have been in discussion about. What we can offer at the moment is the development of custom modules if there's a sufficient demand from a team or organization. And under varying commercial arrangements, we're developing models for financial services, for real estate agents, mortgage brokers, and so on at the moment. Oh, sorry, Chris. I assumed that it was a typo and that you had misheard me there. Apologies about that. I don't have any particular expertise in terms of Claude, the speech recording AI. I'm aware of a range of others, and I think that will become more and more. Let me just refer back to your earlier question. Sorry. Now that I know that you're referring to Claude, sorry. Right. Yeah. So I think AI voice recording and transcription services are going to become immediately commonplace. There's a reason why we chose the Debbie, hand transcription of meeting notes example, because you will get very, very good summaries from AI voice recording and transcription services that can then summarize the meetings to find the next steps and just take an enormous amount of administrative load away. We haven't addressed any of those platforms specifically within our program, but we're adding platforms to them regularly. I think that makes us 1:58, so I should allow a moment or two if Sushma would like to close, but if there are any further questions that come through, I'm happy for my details to be provided to all attendees, and we can engage offline following the webinar.
Thanks, Andrew. I think we have answered all the questions that have been asked. If anybody has anything else, and do you have any other questions, you can directly write down to us. I will ask Andrew to answer those questions via email. As of now, we do not have any other questions. Thank you so much, Andrew, for this amazing and knowledgeable presentation. Thank you all for joining us in this webinar, and I hope you found the shared information useful and insightful. Remember to apply the knowledge gained in your work and share it with others. The webinar recording will be shared with you and uploaded to our YouTube channel in the next few days. Don't forget to check out our website for more resources and upcoming events. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a nice day. Thank you so much. Thanks,
Thank you,
Andrew.
everyone. Thank you.